Just another day of War Thunder. And look at that little guy right there. Hey, you! That's right, I'm talking to you. Your battle's been going very well today? No? Well, gee, that's a bummer. What if I was to tell you about a really good method for making good battlefield decisions? You want to hear about it? Very good. Let me tell you all about the OODA Loop. Excelling at War Thunder requires more than luck and a quick shot in the right place. Those who know how to exploit their environment, their equipment, and an adversary's weaknesses coupled with regular practice and teamwork are more likely to achieve victory against their opponents. The cycle of repeated battlefield decisions and actions can be easily expressed with what is called the OODA Loop. What is the OODA Loop? It stands for the words observe, orient, decide, act. It is the brainchild of USAF Colonel John Boyd. In the skies over the Korean peninsula, flying the F-86 Sabre, and later on over the Nellis test range flying the F-100 Super Sabre, John Boyd would mentally conceptualize the ideas and tenets of his famous energy maneuverability theory. After training pilots at Nellis, he returned to university studies to test his ideas with mathematics and to put them to paper with the name we know it by today, EM theory. Anyone with a more than passive interest in air combat knows that EM theory changed the face of air combat forever. Toward his later years in life, after influencing the design of fighter aircraft by way of EM theory, Colonel Boyd heavily studied how war and combat is conducted. Through study and observation, he managed to break down the cycle of decision-making and action in war into four fundamental parts: observe, orient, decide, act. Otherwise, of course, known as OODA. Let's look at the various parts of the OODA Loop. The first step in the OODA Loop is to observe. With observation, we need to acknowledge the unfolding actions and circumstances of our environment, all while adding outside relatable knowledge. Just looking at this picture here, we can observe our surroundings. If there's friends in front of us, if there are enemies in front of us, if there's cover for our tank, if there are obstacles in our way, we can see the terrain. We can also observe on the minimap that there are two control zones. We have one on our side, the other team has one on their side. And we also observe the fact that to win this game, we need to either take that control zone or kill all the other enemy tanks or vehicles. Now, after gaining all the outside observations and information that we need, we must move on to the next phase, and that is the orientation or orient phase. It is at this step that we filter relevant information, our previous experience from past experiences, even our cultures of both ourselves and our enemy, while analyzing and litigating everything that we know and have experienced. And when I say culture, I just don't mean, dance, art, food, etc., etc. I'm talking about habits, as well as training doctrine. That's all part of culture as well. So we must acknowledge that. Furthermore, orientation is where a collective of individuals must bring in teamwork, and because of that, orientation is where the OODA Loop typically stalls, and this can be due to conflictions and differences in the team that not only lead to bad decisions or incomplete decisions, you may not even come to a decision at all. Now, using what we know and going back to our snapshot here, we know plenty about the environment already. Now we need to understand more about the environment in terms of what our enemy might do and what we can do and what we should do based on our past experiences, what we've experienced from enemies on this map, as well as the format of these control zones. Generally, we can expect the enemy to go straight for the control zone that's on our side of the map. And we also know that there are likely going to be some enemies that come around the south side of the lake and decide to flank. Now, we must also consider our vehicle type, what we're driving here, where our teammates are, and we also must consider what has been more successful for us in the past. Do we go with something different, or do we go with the tried and true method of, maybe defending our control zone or going straight for the control zone that's under the control of the other team? And like I mentioned earlier, teamwork comes into play in orientation. Well, War Thunder is a pretty team-oriented game. At the same time, it's not. Unless you're playing in a squad with a few people using microphones, Generally, you mostly play the game when it comes to communicating. You do it either by typing in the chat or using the quick chat system. And you can get some basic teamwork going quite easily, and I think most people should focus on doing that when playing the game. It's a big part of the orientation phase. Often teamwork does not necessarily have to be said for it to be inferred. If somebody's going for control zone, you can back that person up and help defend them and help take the control zone, so you take it twice as fast as opposed to that person by themselves. So teamwork doesn't always have to be vocal. Often it's just visual. You just kind of take the point and you run with it. And with that, it brings us to our next phase, which is the decide or decision phase. Now, using what we've observed and looking at our orientation and taking all we know, all we've experienced, etc., what's happening on the battlefield at this very moment, we're going to use it to come to some sort of conclusion, and we're going to make a decision. Now, of course, coming back to our snapshot here, we know that the enemy's likely going to go for a control zone. There's going to be a few enemies coming around their left flank, around the south side of the lake. And we can make multiple decisions here. We can choose to decide to defend the right side of our flank, our right flank, which would be any enemies coming around the lake, or we could decide to defend our control zone directly, as well as defend our spawn areas, or we could also go for the control zone under the enemy's control at this moment directly. There's a lot of different things we could do here. And probably in this situation, I would probably just decide to go straight for the enemy control zone, the tried and true hit 'em straight on method. That would bring us to our final phase, and that is the act or action phase. We carry out what we've decided based on our orientation, which is further based on our observations. Now, during the OODA Loop process, you will constantly be bringing back information and ideas back into your observation phase, and you're kind of filtering those in while filtering other things out. You're constantly making OODA Loop style decisions all the time, possibly multiple times a second. You don't just do one, you just don't do a few, you're always making them. So let's make another OODA Loop style decision phase, etc. I observe that my cat is meowing at me. My cat meowing at me usually means she wants food, because I know from previous experience which directly ties into orientation. Now, going back to the observation phase, I observe the time on the clock, which does not coincide with her feeding time, which is related to orientation. It's based on habit and things that we already know. Now, I orient this new information with my overall orientation that I want her to stay within her allocated feeding time, which can tie into culture because it's a habitual thing. Now, she does not need more food because that will make her fat if she gets fed more than she normally does. And that ties into our experience as well as analysis and synthesis, part of orientation. So I decide to not feed her based on what I have observed and oriented previously in the past few years with my cat. And then I act this out by telling her she'll get fed later, and I ignore her meows. Now here's where I decide to further exploit the idea of the OODA Loop by deciding to go straight for the enemy spawn on this map. And by doing so, I can build confusion in the collective OODA Loop of this team. They will not expect to be shot as soon as they spawn in, and that will create confusion. It'll also give me opportunities for kills, which betters the situation for my team. Oh shit. Now I'm making another decision here based on the fact that I'm someone out in the open and I can easily be shot, and I'm in a light tank. This is an M22. So I decide to move further back from the spawn so they're facing away from me as they spawn in, which further creates more confusion. You know, this guy right here is probably thinking to himself, you know, what the fuck's going on? Who's shooting at me? You know, I just spawned in. And this building confusion in him while he's getting shot at, so he's taking damage too. He's pretty much overwhelmed. So, little guy, do you think you learned a lot from this lesson? Do you think you've learned how the OODA Loop can help you out in battlefield decisions? Great! With the OODA Loop on his side, we can expect him to go out and dominate the battlefield, even in that tiny little M22. Go get him, Tiger!